A young boy sitting in the courtroom suddenly raises his finger, pointing straight at a policeman, his words sending a shockwave through the entire room. No one could have anticipated that what started as a routine hearing would soon unravel a truth so powerful it would shake the very foundations of the system itself. What exactly did he say? Stick with us until the end to find out, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension, a silent storm brewing just beneath the surface. Whispered conversations drifted through the space like an electric current, the rustling of papers punctuating the weight of anticipation. The tall, imposing windows allowed beams of golden sunlight to slice through the room, casting dramatic shadows across the polished wooden floors. It was a space filled to the brim, spectators, journalists, and legal observers, all gathered in an almost morbid fascination with the unfolding case. At the heart of it all sat the defendant, a young man named Thomas Bailey. He was white, his wrists bound in cold metal shackles, his entire demeanor one of exhaustion and quiet despair. Shoulders hunched, gaze fixed downward, he looked like a man who had already lost long before the verdict was even spoken. The accusations against him were grave. He was charged with a vicious assault on an elderly woman, an attack so brutal it had left her hospitalized and destitute. The evidence against him? Overwhelming, or so it seemed. The prosecution had built a seemingly airtight case, solid forensic reports, witness testimonies, and a story that fit the usual expectations of the justice system. Thomas Bailey came from the wrong side of town, a young man burdened with financial hardship and without any powerful allies to vouch for him. To many in the room, he already looked guilty. The lead prosecutor stood tall, exuding confidence, his suit crisp and his voice unwavering as he meticulously laid out the case against Thomas. His words painted a picture of desperation, a young man willing to commit a heinous crime just to survive. Across from him sat the defense attorney, a man of stark contrast. His suit wasn't as pristine, his face lined with exhaustion. He was overworked, underfunded, but still determined to fight for his client. He spoke with urgency, insisting that Thomas had an alibi, one that had been ignored. He challenged the so-called evidence, calling it circumstantial at best. But in a system that favored the prepared and the powerful, his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. A few rows behind the defense sat Monica Johnson, a black woman in her mid-30s. She was there not by choice, but because she had been called to testify. Her small grocery store was close to the crime scene, and while she hadn't seen the attack itself, she had caught glimpses of movement that night. She believed her testimony wouldn't make much difference until everything changed. Seated beside her was her 5-year-old son, Elijah. A small, curious boy, he clutched a toy car in his hands, his little fingers guiding it over the wooden bench, lost in a world of imagination. He was too young to grasp the weight of the moment, the gravity that filled the air. His mother hushed him occasionally, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder, but his mind wandered, detached from the seriousness around him. And then, in an instant, the energy in the courtroom shifted. A side door creaked open, and in walked a group of uniformed police officers, their presence a mere formality, there to maintain order if necessary. Among them was a tall, broad-shouldered black man, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. Sergeant Darius King. King was a well-known figure in the district, both respected and feared. He was known as a tough but fair officer, a man who had climbed the ranks through grit and determination. Many viewed him as a guardian of the law, someone who kept the streets in check, ensuring criminals were swiftly brought to justice. For a while, things proceeded as expected. Lawyers continued their battle of words, legal jargon filling the air, the judge preparing to move forward with the testimonies. But then something happened, something no one could have foreseen. Elijah, who had been absently playing with his toy, suddenly froze. His tiny fingers slackened, and the car slipped from his grasp, tumbling onto the floor with a faint clatter. His mother turned to him, puzzled by his sudden stillness. But Elijah wasn't looking at her. His wide brown eyes, filled with something between recognition and fear, were locked onto Sergeant King. The courtroom carried on, oblivious to the small boy's reaction. Lawyers spoke, papers shuffled, but Elijah was no longer a passive observer. His breathing quickened, his small chest rising and falling. And then, in a voice that was surprisingly clear, unwavering despite his young age, he spoke the words that would change everything. I saw him. His voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and impossible to ignore. A hush fell over the courtroom. Monica stiffened beside her son, her breath catching in her throat. Heads turned, confused murmurs rippling through the crowd as people searched for the source of the voice. The judge, caught off guard, looked toward the boy. All eyes followed suit. Elijah's small hand lifted, his tiny finger extending outward. And then, with complete certainty, he pointed. Straight at Sergeant King. He was there. The room went still. She no longer knew where she was heading, only that she had to keep moving, had to escape. The world around her blurred as she ran, the distant wail of sirens slicing through the early morning stillness like a warning she couldn't afford to ignore. Behind her, the past was closing in fast, but ahead, the city stretched endlessly, bathed in the soft glow of dawn, a maze of possibilities and dangers waiting to unfold. What had led her to this moment? What was she running from? The answers lingered just beneath the surface, tangled in fear and desperation. One thing was certain, stopping was not an option. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss gripping stories like this. Keep watching. Our next video awaits, or explore more thrilling content on our channel. And don't forget to share the story with your friends and family.